Hi. Why is it that we look at a story, fact or fiction, from the perspective of the person presenting it or the point of view of the protagonist? Why especially do we accept the particular belief or position offered to us when the protagonist is as evil as the antagonist, or the point of view of the author is as damaging or cruel as that of the person or people he's condemning? Sometimes we even uphold a person doing wrong in a narrative rather than a person who's innocent. Why do we relate to some, putting ourselves in their place and feeling their pain, yet we cannot do the same for others? Let's use a Bible story as an example, because I think this story clearly shows what I'm talking about, and it's part of our problem. Then we can move on to present day issues. We all remember the tale of the Israelites' enslavement in Egypt. Their God, Yahweh, sees their affliction, comes down, leads them out of Egypt with a mighty hand. Then he takes them, gives them a land flowing with milk and honey. So he's looked down, seen his people's oppression, and come to their rescue. Let the people rejoice, right? Well, not all the people. They're not all rejoicing. First, Yahweh killed innocent babies, all the firstborn, old and young, in Egypt. Then he had his own people go into the lands of others and murder the men and women, rape the young girls, plunder the goods, and steal the land. That land flowing with milk and honey belonged to somebody else. But somehow we don't think about those other people. Not all lives matter to us. What happens next in this story? After the Jews have murdered various other tribes and stolen their land, then what do they do? Lo and behold, they become slave owners themselves. Now, one would think their God would frown on that. You'd assume he'd say, "Don't you remember how badly you were treated in Egypt? Why would you do to others what you don't want done to you?" But Confucianism hadn't come along yet, so Yahweh, unlike Jesus later, didn't know anything about the Golden Rule. Yahweh tells his people they can buy male and female slaves. These slaves will be their property, and they can bequeath them to their children as a possession forever. And how are the Jews to treat these slaves? The Bible says they can beat their slaves with a rod, and as long as the tortured slave was able to crawl out of bed in a day or two, then the master wouldn't be punished. Why? Because the slave was his property. That's the reason the text gives. The slave was his property. This is in Exodus 21, verses 20 through 21, if you're interested. Yes, these Jews were allowed by their God to treat others in this heinous manner, at least the ones they hadn't murdered when they stole their land. In fact, the Jews were allowed to be harsh taskmasters, much like the ones under which they had suffered in Egypt. They were given permission by their God to beat their slaves, their property that they could bequeath to their children, as long as the slaves were able to get up and walk within a couple of days. And yes, I'm repeating myself, because this is craziness. Do you think the Jews were treated worse than this in Egypt? I doubt it. Yet we're expected to feel great sympathy for the Jewish plight and no pity at all for the poor, sorrowful, downtrodden people the Jews are now mistreating. Bible believers gloss over this evil behavior while smiling as they tell the beautiful story of how Yahweh saved the Jews. Yes, the event of that bloody night, blood splattered on the ground, blood splattered in the hallways, blood splattered on the walls, blood splattered in the beds, mothers weeping for their children, families never able to recover from the devastation of it all. It's considered a wonderful occurrence to remember over and over again, year after year, with joy and appreciation. We ignore the cruelties propagated against the Egyptians and the nations Israel murdered, unconcerned about their bloody dead bodies and their loss of property and freedom. And then we bow our heads and fondly reminisce instead about the blood splattered on the doorposts and the sweet freedom the Jews received, so they could become like their own taskmasters against other people. Because again, not all lives matter, right? Back to the question in the beginning. Why is it that, in this particular example, we can't see past the slanted narrative written by the Jews and recognize that they were as cruel as their own oppressors, with their God's blessing? And ours, apparently. Why aren't we able to see the hypocrisy of the Jews or of their God? The answer is that the story is presented to us in such a way that we know we aren't supposed to worry about these poor souls. This is the will of God. Yahweh didn't look down and see the affliction of these poor tormented people. Their oppression meant nothing to him. He authorized it. So we accept it as okay. We're looking at the story from the Jewish viewpoint, a perspective in which they are the good guys, and the Egyptians, Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, any otherites, are the bad guys. And we think it's okay, once we demonize a group of people, to treat them with disrespect and disregard. We've been conditioned not to think about them at all, or to think poorly of them. We've been told one side of the story. We've read the tale from the view of the Jews, and we apparently aren't capable of thinking for ourselves. And I believe that this is the case regarding our lives today. Many of us can't see this going on in our own hearts and minds. We see everything from an American viewpoint, or a white perspective, or the Christian belief system, or from whatever position we might be familiar with or have been taught. If we are concerned, though, for American soldiers, if we feel compassion for suffering white people, if we have empathy for Christian martyrs, but we don't shed a tear for Palestinian soldiers or weeping black and brown children or Muslim martyrs, and I shouldn't have to say this, but I'm referring to actual martyrs, not terrorists. If this is who we are, then we're as bad as the Jews in this story. We care only for ourselves. Yeah, I know what it's like to be different. My family was poor. I grew up having soup, beans, and taters every night for supper. I've gone without warm clothing in the winter, and I've worn hand-me-downs. There was a time when my hand-me-downs came from a neighbor boy. I went to school wearing a boy's dress pants. But I have never been like the mulatto girl in my class who started her period and asked to go home, and the teacher took her into the bathroom and made her show her the blood on her underwear. Blood splattered on her panties bought that girl's freedom from school that day. I've also never been like the little boy in my class who had trouble learning. The boy who drew my name for Christmas and brought me a candy bar to school as a present, only to have the teacher force him to take it back and give me the gift someone had brought for him. That candy bar may have been all the boy could afford. It might have been his to eat. Maybe his parents refused to buy a gift for me, or maybe they couldn't afford one for me. And maybe he generously gave me his own candy bar. I don't know why he brought me a candy bar, but I know he must have been humiliated. And I can't imagine he ever forgot that day. I was smart and tiny and cute. And just as the Jews had Yahweh on their side, I had the teacher on mine. I was her pet, as the Jews were Yahweh's pets. So the teacher saw my perspective, but didn't see the boys. That little boy's own present, the gift someone had brought for him, was a candy cane. Oh, it was one of those big ones, maybe about that big. But I doubt it cost much more than the candy bar he'd given me. I'm not sure who gave the boy the candy cane, but that person was not humiliated by the teacher for bringing candy. And I would just as soon have had the candy bar as the candy cane. Maybe I'd have preferred it. I don't know. And although I hurt for that boy that day, I was too young, 8 or 9 years old, to do anything about it or even know what to do. I wish I had given him back his candy cane and told him I preferred the candy bar. I wish I had lifted that boy up that day. But as I said, I was too young to know to do that, or maybe even that I could. But I'm not young now, and I'm asking you, how much blood, how much misery, how much cruelty is it going to take before we realize that despite what some ancient people have told us their God, their tribal God, revealed to them, or even what our parents or our teachers might have taught us, the fact is that skin color, education, money, gender, sexual orientation, size, marital status, intelligence, religion, diet, nationality, or a crooked back, wounded genitals, flat nose, or blemish shouldn't change how we view or relate to people. When are we going to realize that all lives matter? Thank you so much for watching this video. Bye.